The phone call came at 2:47 in the afternoon. Michelle Kemp's voice was shaking. She told her mother-in-law that someone wanted her to sign blank papers. 4 sheets. No explanation. Her mother-in-law said, "Don't sign anything." Michelle said, "Okay." There was a pause. Then Michelle said, "Here they come." The line went dead. That was January 10th, 1985. Michelle Kemp was 19 years old. Her daughter Tiffany was 4 months old. Neither of them was ever seen again. What happened in room 131 of the Rodeway Inn that day would take 15 years to understand. And when investigators finally connected the pieces, they realized they'd been looking at the same man since 1984. 3 women, 3 years, 1 predator. This is the story of how a system failed to see what was right in front of it. Subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and when. Part 1. September 1st, 1984. Overland Park, Kansas, a Saturday morning. Jennifer Hartley was 19 years old and about to start over. She'd graduated from Olathe North High School the year before. Good grades, ambitious. She'd been a competitive figure skater, not professional level, but good enough that people noticed. Her parents noticed too. They wanted her to go to college. But Jennifer wanted something different. She wanted a career, business, sales, something that felt real. She found the ad in the Kansas City Star Classifieds, late August. Sales representatives needed, travel opportunities, professional wardrobe provided. Apply, Midwest Professional Services. It sounded perfect, maybe too perfect. But Jennifer didn't think that way. She was 19. She saw opportunity. She called the number. A man answered. His name was Raymond Walsh. He sounded professional, calm. He explained that Midwest Professional Services was a management consulting firm. They worked with companies across the Midwest. He said they were expanding. He said they needed young, motivated people. He said Jennifer sounded like exactly what they were looking for. They scheduled an interview. Jennifer went to the office on August 28th. It was in a small building off Metcalf Avenue. Nothing fancy, but it looked legitimate. Raymond Walsh was in his 40s. Confident, well-dressed. He asked her about her goals, her skills, her willingness to travel. Jennifer said she was ready for anything. He hired her on the spot. He told her she'd start with training. A group of young women would fly to San Antonio, Texas on September 1st. They'd spend 2 weeks at a clerical skills course. Midwest Professional Services would cover all expenses, flights, hotel, meals. When they returned, they'd begin working as sales representatives. Jennifer was excited. She told her parents. Her father seemed uncertain. The whole thing felt rushed, but Jennifer was an adult. She'd made her decision. On the morning of September 1st, Raymond Walsh arrived at the Hartley home in his car. He was punctual, polite. He shook hands with Jennifer's father. He said he'd drive Jennifer to the airport. Her flight left at noon. He promised to take care of everything. Jennifer hugged her parents. She got into the car. Raymond Walsh drove away. That was the last time her family saw her. September 4th, 1984. 3 days later, Jennifer's father called the Midwest Professional Services office. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. He drove to the office on Metcalf Avenue. The door was locked. He looked through the window. The office looked empty. He called the San Antonio hotel where Jennifer was supposed to be staying. They had no record of her checking in, no reservation under her name, no reservation under Midwest Professional Services. He went to the Overland Park Police Department. He filed a missing person report. The officer who took the report was professional but not particularly concerned. Jennifer was 19, an adult. She'd left voluntarily. Maybe she changed her mind. Maybe she decided to start over somewhere else. Her father insisted something was wrong. The officer said they'd look into it. September 7th, 1984, 6 days after Jennifer disappeared, a letter arrived at the Hartley home. It was postmarked Kansas City, Kansas. The envelope was addressed to Jennifer's parents. Inside was a single typed page. The letter said Jennifer was fine. She'd decided to start over. She didn't know where she'd end up yet. She thanked Raymond Walsh for giving her the opportunity. She said she needed time away from everyone. She asked her family not to look for her. The letter was typed. There was no handwritten signature, just her name at the bottom, Jennifer Hartley. Her mother read it twice. Then she called the police. She said the letter didn't sound like Jennifer. The phrasing was wrong. Jennifer didn't write like that, and Jennifer would never leave without saying goodbye properly. The officer who responded said the letter seemed clear. Jennifer wanted to leave. She was an adult. There wasn't much they could do. But Jennifer's father wasn't satisfied. He went back to the Metcalf Avenue office. This time the door was open. Raymond Walsh was inside. He looked surprised to see Jennifer's father, but he stayed calm. Jennifer's father demanded answers. Where was his daughter? Why didn't she go to San Antonio? What happened? Raymond Walsh said he didn't know. He said Jennifer had mentioned something about changing her plans. He said she seemed uncertain about the training program. He said maybe she decided to do something else. Jennifer's father didn't believe him. He told Walsh he had 3 days to make Jennifer contact her family, or he'd come back with the police. Raymond Walsh nodded. He said he understood. 3 days passed. No call, no letter. Jennifer's father went back to the police. He brought the typed letter. He explained his conversation with Walsh. He said something was very wrong. The detective assigned to the case was Frank Copeland, mid-40s, 20 years with Overland Park PD. He'd seen a lot of missing person cases, most of them resolved within a week, runaways, family disputes, misunderstandings. But this one felt different. Copeland went to the Midwest Professional Services office. He spoke with Raymond Walsh. Walsh was cooperative, almost too cooperative. He repeated the same story. Jennifer had been hired. She was supposed to go to San Antonio, but she'd expressed doubts. He assumed she'd changed her mind. Copeland asked for records, employee files, training schedules. Walsh said everything was in order. He'd provide whatever was needed. Copeland left the office. He ran a background check on Raymond Walsh. What came back was interesting. Raymond Walsh had a criminal record: embezzlement, fraud, theft from previous employers. He'd been convicted in the early 1980s, served time, been released. No one in Overland Park knew about it. Walsh had started fresh. New business, new reputation. Copeland went back to the office. He asked Walsh about his criminal history. Walsh admitted it. He said he'd made mistakes. He said he'd paid his debt to society. He said Midwest Professional Services was legitimate. Copeland didn't have enough for an arrest. No body, no proof of foul play, just a missing woman and a suspicious employer. The investigation stalled. Jennifer Hartley's case went cold. What Detective Copeland didn't know was that Raymond Walsh was about to do it again. January 1985, 4 months later, Kansas City, Kansas. Michelle Kemp was 19 years old. Her life had fallen apart quickly. She'd married Carl Kemp in August 1984 in Huntsville, Alabama. 1 month before their daughter Tiffany was born. The marriage didn't last. Carl re-enlisted in the military. He moved to Illinois. Michelle and Tiffany moved to Kansas City. They had nowhere else to go. Michelle ended up at Hope House, a shelter for women and children. It wasn't permanent, but it was safe. The staff helped residents find jobs, housing, a way forward. That's where Michelle met Raymond Walsh. He came to Hope House in December 1984. He said he represented the Kansas City Outreach Program, a charitable organization designed to help young mothers. He said the program provided free housing, child care, educational support, everything a young mother needed to get back on her feet. He said his name was John Osborne. The staff at Hope House thought it sounded promising. They'd never heard of the Kansas City Outreach Program, but Raymond Walsh had business cards, letterhead. He seemed legitimate. Michelle was interested. She had no money, no family nearby, no options. The program sounded too good to be true, but she was desperate. Raymond Walsh said he could help. He said there was an opening in the program. He said Michelle and Tiffany could move into temporary housing while Michelle studied for her GED. Everything would be covered. Michelle agreed. In early January 1985, Raymond Walsh arranged for Michelle and Tiffany to stay at the Rodeway Inn in Overland Park, room 131. He paid for it with a company credit card, Midwest Professional Services. Michelle told her sister-in-law, Karen, about the arrangement. Karen was Carl's brother's wife. She lived in Kansas City. She'd been helping Michelle with Tiffany, babysitting when Michelle looked for work. Karen was skeptical. The whole thing sounded strange. A man she'd never heard of. A program no one could verify. Free housing, no strings attached. She told Michelle to be careful. Michelle said she didn't have a choice. January 8th, 1985, evening. Karen babysat Tiffany while Michelle met with Raymond Walsh. Michelle said he wanted to discuss the next steps in the program. She'd be gone a few hours. Michelle returned late. She picked up Tiffany. The baby was fussy, 4 months old, dark hair like her father. Brown eyes that would look around the room, trying to understand everything. Michelle bounced her gently, trying to soothe her. She seemed nervous. She said Mr. Osborne was looking for her. She needed to get back to the motel. Karen watched them leave. She had a bad feeling, but Michelle was an adult. She made her own choices. January 10th, 1985, morning. Michelle called Karen. She asked if Karen could watch Tiffany for a few hours. Michelle said she needed to meet with Mr. Osborne again. Karen agreed. Michelle dropped Tiffany off around 10 a.m. The baby was in a yellow onesie. She had a bottle, a pacifier, a small stuffed rabbit that Michelle said was Tiffany's favorite. Michelle kissed her forehead. She said she'd be back by early afternoon. Karen held Tiffany. The baby looked up at her with wide eyes. She made small sounds. Not quite words yet, just baby noises. Karen didn't know it then, but that moment would haunt her for years. The weight of Tiffany in her arms, the trust in those eyes. Michelle said she'd be back soon. She never came back. 2:47 p.m. The phone rang at Karen's house. It was Michelle. Her voice was shaking. She was crying. She said she was at the Rodeway Inn. She said something was wrong. Karen asked what happened. Michelle said people were telling her that Carl's mother was trying to take Tiffany away. They said Carl's mother claimed Michelle was an unfit parent. They had papers. They wanted Michelle to sign them. Karen said it wasn't true. No one was trying to take Tiffany. Carl's mother had said no such thing. Michelle calmed down slightly. She said someone wanted her to sign 4 blank sheets of paper. Karen told her not to sign anything. Not without a lawyer. Not without understanding what they were. Michelle said, "Okay." There was a pause. Karen could hear Michelle breathing. Fast. Scared. Then Michelle said, "Here they come." The line went dead. Karen called back immediately. The front desk at the Rodeway Inn answered. Karen asked to be connected to room 131. The desk clerk checked. He said the room had just been checked out. No one was there. Karen grabbed Tiffany. She put her in the car seat. She drove to the motel. 20 minutes. Tiffany was crying the whole way. Karen kept saying it would be okay. She'd find Michelle. Everything would be okay. She went to the front desk. She asked about room 131. The clerk confirmed. Michelle Kemp had checked out around 3 p.m. She'd left with a man. He didn't get a good look at him. Karen went to the room. The door was open. Housekeeping was already cleaning. Michelle's yellow Toyota Corolla was still in the parking lot. Her belongings were still in the car. Her purse, her clothes, everything. But Michelle was gone. Karen stood there holding Tiffany. The baby had stopped crying. She was looking around, maybe waiting for her mother, maybe wondering where that familiar voice went. Karen felt sick. January 11th, 1985. The next morning. Karen went to the Overland Park Police Department. She filed a missing person report. She explained everything. The Kansas City Outreach Program, Mr. Osborne, the phone call, the blank papers. Tiffany was with her, sitting in a stroller, quiet, looking at faces. The officer asked if Michelle had left voluntarily. Karen said no. Michelle was terrified. Something happened in that room. The officer took the report. He said they'd investigate. He looked at Tiffany. He asked if Karen could take care of her. Karen said yes, for now, until they found Michelle. She didn't know then that for now would become permanent, that she'd be raising this baby, that Tiffany would call her Aunt Karen but wouldn't remember her real mother's face. Karen went back to the Rodeway Inn. She asked the front desk who paid for room 131. The clerk checked the records. The room was paid for with a company credit card, Midwest Professional Services. Karen didn't recognize the name, but she wrote it down. She went to the address listed on the credit card receipt, a small office on Metcalf Avenue. She found the office. She walked inside. A man was sitting at a desk, mid-40s, well-dressed. He looked up. Karen asked if he was Mr. Osborne. He paused. Then he said his name was Raymond Walsh. He owned Midwest Professional Services. Karen asked about Michelle Kemp. Where was she? Where was her baby's mother? Raymond Walsh's expression changed. He said he didn't know anyone named Michelle Kemp. Karen described her. Walsh said he might have met her, but he didn't know where she was. Karen's brother-in-law, Michelle's husband's brother, was with her. He stepped forward. He demanded answers. Walsh stood up. He told them to leave. The brother-in-law didn't move. Walsh shoved him toward the door. Karen and her brother-in-law left. They went straight back to the police. Detective Rita Vasquez caught the case. Late 30s, 8 years with Overland Park PD. She'd worked missing persons before. She listened to Karen's story. She took notes. She asked about the company credit card. Karen gave her the receipt. Vasquez recognized the name, Midwest Professional Services. She'd heard it before. Where? She went back to the station. She pulled old files. And there it was, Jennifer Hartley, September 1984, missing, last seen with Raymond Walsh, Midwest Professional Services. Vasquez felt her stomach drop. This wasn't a coincidence. She pulled the Hartley file. She read Detective Copeland's notes. She saw the background check. Raymond Walsh. Criminal record, fraud, embezzlement. She called Copeland. She told him about Michelle Kemp. Copeland came to her desk. They compared notes. 2 women, 4 months apart. Same company, same man. And now, a missing baby. They needed to move fast. January 12th, 1985. The next day, Vasquez and Copeland went to the Midwest Professional Services office. Raymond Walsh was there. He looked surprised to see 2 detectives. They asked about Michelle Kemp. Walsh said he'd already explained this to the family. He didn't know where she was. He said he'd met her briefly. She was interested in a program he was developing, but she never followed through. Vasquez asked about the Rodeway Inn. Why did he pay for her room? Walsh said it was temporary assistance, part of the outreach program. He was trying to help young mothers. There was nothing illegal about that. Copeland asked about Jennifer Hartley. Walsh's expression didn't change. He said Jennifer had been an employee. She'd decided to leave. He hadn't heard from her since. Vasquez asked about the baby. Where was Tiffany Kemp? Walsh said he didn't know anything about a baby. Vasquez asked for records, employee files, financial documents, correspondence with Jennifer and Michelle. Walsh said he'd need to consult with his lawyer. The detectives left. They didn't have enough for a warrant. No bodies, no witnesses, no physical evidence, just 2 missing women, 1 missing infant, and 1 suspicious man. They started digging deeper. They contacted the Kansas City Outreach Program, or tried to. There was no such organization, no registration, no nonprofit status. It didn't exist. They contacted Catholic Charities, Truman Medical Center, Hope House. No one had heard of Raymond Walsh or his outreach program. No one had referred clients to him. They went back to Hope House. They interviewed staff. One counselor remembered Walsh. She said he'd come in December 1984. He'd spoken to a few residents. Michelle Kemp was one of them. He'd seemed professional. He had business cards. No one thought to verify his credentials. Vasquez and Copeland realized what they were dealing with. Raymond Walsh was creating fake programs, fake opportunities. He was targeting vulnerable women, women with no support system, no one to ask questions. But why? What was he doing with them? And where was the baby? March 1985. 2 months after Michelle disappeared, a letter arrived at Hope House. It was addressed to the staff. The envelope was postmarked Kansas City, Kansas. Inside was a typed letter. It was supposedly from Michelle Kemp. The letter said Michelle was fine. She and Tiffany were starting over somewhere new. She thanked the staff for their help. She said she didn't want to be contacted. She needed a fresh start. The letter was typed. No handwritten signature. Just her name at the bottom. Michelle Kemp. The staff at Hope House forwarded it to Detective Vasquez. Vasquez compared it to the letter Jennifer Hartley's family had received. The typing was similar. The phrasing was similar. The tone was almost identical. Vasquez was certain. Raymond Walsh had written both letters, but proving it was different. The letters didn't contain threats. They didn't contain confessions. They just said the women wanted to leave. And in the eyes of the law, that wasn't a crime. Vasquez contacted Carl Kemp, Michelle's estranged husband. He was in Illinois. She told him his wife and daughter were missing. Carl said he'd last spoken to his mother about Michelle. His mother said Michelle had called on January 10th. She'd been hysterical, scared. She'd mentioned blank papers. Then the call ended. Vasquez asked Carl's mother for more details. She said Michelle had been terrified. She'd said someone was lying to her, trying to manipulate her. She'd calmed down briefly. Then she'd said, "Here they come." Then nothing. That phone call was the last anyone heard from Michelle Kemp. Vasquez and Copeland brought the case to the district attorney. They laid out the evidence. 2 missing women, same employer, fake programs, forged letters, criminal history, a missing infant. The DA said it wasn't enough. There was no proof Walsh had harmed anyone. The women were adults. They'd left voluntarily. The letters suggested they wanted to disappear. As for the baby, without proof of foul play, there was nothing to charge. Without bodies, there was no case. The investigation stalled again. Vasquez kept working. She looked into Midwest Professional Services. The company was legitimate on paper. Walsh had clients, contracts. But most of them were small, Unremarkable. The business barely made money. So how was Walsh funding everything? The office, the motel rooms, the credit cards? She pulled financial records. Walsh had multiple bank accounts, unusual transactions, deposits that didn't match his business income, withdrawals that didn't match his expenses. Vasquez suspected fraud, but financial crimes weren't her jurisdiction. She referred it to the FBI. The FBI opened a file, but they didn't prioritize it. White-collar crime, missing persons with no bodies. It went to the bottom of the pile. Months passed, then a year. Jennifer Hartley's family kept calling. Michelle Kemp's family kept calling. Karen called about Tiffany. Where was the baby's mother? Would Michelle ever come home? Vasquez had no answers. Karen was raising Tiffany now. The baby was growing, starting to crawl, to babble, to reach for things, but Michelle never came to see it. What's strange is how it all just stopped. No more disappearances after Michelle, not from Overland Park, not connected to Midwest Professional Services. Raymond Walsh was still operating his business, still living his life, but the pattern had broken. Detectives Vasquez and Copeland didn't know why. June 15th, 1987. 2 years after Michelle disappeared, Diane Porter arrived in Kansas City. She was 32 years old. She'd been living in Wichita Falls, Texas, with her son, but her life had gotten complicated. She'd struggled with alcohol, drugs. Her brother offered to help. He lived in Kansas City. He said she could stay with him, get clean, find work, start over. Diane left her son with her parents in Texas, temporary, until she got back on her feet. She called him every night, told him bedtime stories over the phone, promised she'd come back soon, better, stronger. She found a job quickly, an ad in the paper. Office assistant needed, travel opportunities, apply, Midwest Professional Services. Diane called the number. A man answered, Raymond Walsh. He said the position was still available. He scheduled an interview. Diane went to the office on Metcalf Avenue. Walsh hired her on the spot. Diane told her brother. He was skeptical. The job sounded vague, but Diane needed income. She needed to prove she could do this. She took it. Walsh said the position required occasional overnight stays at hotels, business meetings, client consultations. It was normal for the industry. Diane stayed at a local hotel on June 15th. Walsh said he'd pick her up the next morning. They had a meeting in Kansas City. Diane called her son that night. She said good night. She said she loved him. She said she'd call again tomorrow. She never called again. Diane never came home. Her brother called her hotel room. No answer. He went to the hotel. The front desk said she'd checked out that morning. A man had picked her up around 9 a.m. Her brother called Midwest Professional Services. No answer. He went to the office. Raymond Walsh was there. He looked annoyed. Diane's brother asked where his sister was. Walsh said he didn't know. He said Diane had only worked for him a few days. He said she'd mentioned something about going back to Texas. Maybe she changed her mind. Her brother didn't believe him. He went to the police. He filed a missing person report. The case landed on Detective Frank Copeland's desk. He read the report. Then he saw the name, Midwest Professional Services, Raymond Walsh. He felt his blood run cold. He called Detective Vasquez. She came to his desk. They looked at the file together. 3 women, 3 years, same company, same man. This time, they weren't going to let it stall. Copeland and Vasquez went to the office. Raymond Walsh saw them coming. He didn't look surprised. They asked about Diane Porter. Walsh said she'd worked for him briefly. She'd quit. He didn't know where she went. Copeland asked why this kept happening. Why did women disappear after working for him? Walsh said it was unfortunate, but he couldn't control what his employees did. People quit. People move. It wasn't his responsibility. Vasquez asked if he remembered the baby. Tiffany Kemp, 4 months old when her mother vanished. Walsh said he didn't know anything about a baby, but something in his expression changed, just for a moment. Then it was gone. The detectives left. They had nothing, no new evidence, no witnesses, no bodies. They went to the FBI. They laid out everything. 3 missing women, fake programs, forged letters, a missing infant, the pattern. The FBI agent listened. He said they'd look into it, but without bodies, without physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Raymond Walsh was smart. He covered his tracks. He manipulated vulnerable women, women who had no one to fight for them, women who the system dismissed as runaways. Vasquez refused to give up. She kept digging. She looked into Walsh's associates, his properties, his travel records, his family, but every lead went nowhere. By 1990, the investigation had stalled completely. Raymond Walsh had suffered a series of strokes, but he recovered. His verbal skills remained sharp. He was convicted on unrelated fraud charges and sent to prison. He was released in 1991. He started working in the mobile home industry. The missing women cases went cold, not because detectives stopped caring, but because the system had no framework for this. No database connecting missing persons across jurisdictions, no way to track patterns without physical evidence, no technology to preserve leads that might matter decades later. The Overland Park police kept the files open, but they had no new leads, no new witnesses, no bodies, and crucially, no way to connect what was happening in Kansas to similar crimes elsewhere. The tools didn't exist yet. The databases weren't built. The patterns couldn't be seen across state lines. So the files sat. And Raymond Walsh walked free. And the families waited. Detective Rita Vasquez retired in 1995. She never forgot those names. Jennifer Hartley, Michelle Kemp, Diane Porter, and baby Tiffany, who would be 10 years old by then, growing up with Aunt Karen, going to elementary school, learning to read, not remembering the mother who'd kissed her forehead that January morning. 3 women who vanished without a trace, 3 families who never got answers, 1 infant who lost her mother before she could remember her face. The system had failed them, and Raymond Walsh walked free. But the story doesn't end there, because technology was changing, the internet was arriving, and predators like Raymond Walsh don't stop. They evolve. 15 years later, Raymond Walsh would make a mistake that would reopen everything. And when investigators finally connected all the pieces, they'd realize the horror was far worse than anyone imagined. They'd also discover something that had been hidden for 15 years, something that would answer one of the case's biggest questions. What happened to baby Tiffany? Part 2. May 1999. 14 years after Michelle Kemp vanished. Raymond Walsh was 61 years old. He'd survived prison, strokes, decades of scrutiny. He'd moved on. He was working in the mobile home industry, living quietly. The missing women cases were cold. The families had stopped calling. The detectives had retired. But Raymond Walsh hadn't stopped. He'd just adapted. In the mid-1990s, the internet arrived. Chat rooms, message boards, online services. Walsh saw opportunity. He created profiles on websites dedicated to alternative lifestyles, BDSM communities. He used the screen name Slave Master. He was looking for women, submissive women, women who wanted to explore extreme scenarios, women who would trust him. He found them. By 1999, multiple women had filed complaints with police. Sexual assault, violent encounters, promises that turned into nightmares. The women met Walsh, Through online chat rooms, he'd invite them to Kansas, promise them experiences they'd been fantasizing about. Then things would go too far. The complaints were scattered. Different jurisdictions, different investigators. No one connected them at first. Then someone did. Detective Mark Sullivan worked sex crimes for the Lenexa Police Department, just south of Overland Park. He'd been tracking complaints about a man using online services to lure women. Multiple victims, similar patterns. Sullivan pulled records. He found the name, Raymond Walsh. He ran a background check. And there it was, the old missing persons cases, 1984, 1985, 1987, 3 women, all connected to the same man, all disappeared without a trace. Sullivan called the Overland Park Police Department. He asked if anyone remembered the cases. An older detective did. He pulled the files. He gave Sullivan the name of the original investigator. Rita Vasquez had retired, but she still lived in Kansas City. Sullivan called her. Vasquez remembered everything: Jennifer Hartley, Michelle Kemp, baby Tiffany, Diane Porter. She'd carried those names for 14 years, never forgotten, never let go. She told Sullivan everything: the fake programs, the forged letters, the pattern, the FBI investigation that went nowhere. Sullivan asked if anyone had ever searched Walsh's properties. Vasquez said they'd tried, but without warrants, without probable cause, there was nothing they could do. Sullivan said things were different now. Walsh was facing multiple criminal complaints, sexual assault charges. They could get warrants. Vasquez asked if she could help. Sullivan said yes. June 2000, 1 year later. The investigation moved slowly, building cases, interviewing victims, collecting evidence. Walsh was arrested on sexual assault charges in early 2000. He was denied bail. He sat in jail while investigators worked. Federal authorities got involved. The FBI reopened their file. They looked at Walsh's financial records, his properties, his associates, his family. That's when they found the storage facility. Walsh had been renting a unit in Raymore, Missouri, just south of Kansas City. He'd been paying for it since the mid-1980s. 15 years, cash payments, no records of what was inside. Investigators got a warrant. June 5th, 2000. Morning. FBI agents and local police arrived at the storage facility. They opened Walsh's unit. Inside were several large barrels, industrial drums, sealed. They opened the first one. The smell hit them immediately. Inside was a body, a woman, decomposed, wrapped in plastic. They opened another barrel, another body, then another. 5 barrels, 5 bodies, 5 women. None of them were Jennifer Hartley, Michelle Kemp, or Diane Porter. These were different victims. Women who'd disappeared in the 1990s, women Walsh had met online, women who'd come to Kansas looking for experiences and never left. The discovery made national news. Serial killer, multiple victims, bodies in barrels. The media descended on Kansas City. But for Vasquez, the news was devastating. 5 bodies, but not the women she'd been looking for. Not the women who'd haunted her for 15 years. Where were Jennifer, Michelle, and Diane? And where was baby Tiffany? The FBI investigation intensified. They searched Walsh's properties, his vehicles, his records. They interviewed his family, his associates, anyone who'd known him. That's when they found something strange. Walsh's brother, Thomas Walsh, had adopted a baby girl in January 1985. A private adoption. No agency involved, no official records, just paperwork that Raymond Walsh had arranged. The baby's name was listed as Emily Walsh. Born September 1984. Biological parents unknown. FBI agents went to Thomas Walsh's home. They asked about the adoption. Thomas said his brother had helped them. Thomas and his wife couldn't have children. Raymond said he knew of a young mother who wanted to give her baby up. He arranged everything. The agents asked about the baby's biological mother. Thomas said he never met her. Raymond handled it all. The baby was delivered to their home in January 1985, 4 months old. Raymond said the mother wanted anonymity. Thomas didn't ask questions. The agents asked if they could speak with Emily. Thomas said she was 15 years old now. They could ask, but she didn't know she was adopted. Emily Walsh came downstairs. 15, dark hair, brown eyes. She looked confused, scared. The agents explained carefully. They said there were questions about her adoption. They said it was possible she'd been taken from her biological family. They asked if she'd be willing to provide a DNA sample. Emily looked at her parents. Thomas and his wife were crying. They said they didn't know. They'd thought it was legitimate. Emily agreed to the DNA test. The FBI already had DNA from Michelle Kemp's family, her estranged husband, Carl, his family. The results came back in November 2000. Emily Walsh was Tiffany Kemp. The baby who'd disappeared in January 1985 had been alive the entire time, living with Walsh's brother, raised as their daughter, never knowing her real mother, never knowing she'd been stolen. The FBI brought Emily to a private room. They explained everything, her real mother's name, what had happened in room 131, the phone call, the disappearance. Emily couldn't process it. She'd had a good childhood, loving parents, a normal life, and now she was learning it was all built on a lie. She asked where her real mother was. The agents said they didn't know. Michelle Kemp had never been found. Emily asked if her mother gave her up willingly. The agents said no. Michelle was terrified. She was trying to protect Emily, and then she vanished. Emily asked if Raymond Walsh killed her mother. The agents said they believed so, but they couldn't prove it. Not yet. Emily's world collapsed. She'd lost 2 mothers, the one who raised her, and the one who'd been taken from her before she could remember. November 2000. The investigation continued. The FBI charged Raymond Walsh with Emily's kidnapping. Federal charges, life in prison. Walsh refused to talk. He wouldn't say what happened to Michelle. He wouldn't say where the bodies were. Investigators turned their attention to Jennifer Hartley and Diane Porter. Where were they? They searched everywhere: rural properties, construction sites, water reservoirs. They followed tips, interviewed witnesses, dug through records. Nothing. Walsh's trial began in October 2002. He was charged with the murders of the 5 women found in the storage facility. He was also charged with Emily's kidnapping. The prosecution wanted the death penalty. During the trial, Walsh's wife testified. She said she remembered Raymond bringing a baby home in January 1985. A 4-month-old girl, dirty, no supplies. She said she bought clothes and formula. Then Raymond gave the baby to his brother. She said she didn't ask questions. She didn't want to know. The prosecution presented evidence about Jennifer Hartley and Diane Porter. They couldn't charge Walsh with their murders, no bodies, but they wanted the jury to understand the pattern. 3 women connected to Walsh's fake business. All vanished, all presumed dead. The defense argued there was no proof. No bodies meant no murder charges. The jury deliberated. They found Walsh guilty of murdering the 5 women from the storage facility. They recommended the death penalty for those crimes. They also found him guilty of kidnapping Emily Kemp. Life in prison for that charge. But Jennifer Hartley and Diane Porter were officially left as unsolved disappearances. Michelle Kemp's case was listed as suspected homicide, but without a body, there was no conviction. The judge sentenced Raymond Walsh to death for the 5 proven murders, life in prison for the kidnapping. He was sent to death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility. Walsh never spoke about what happened to Jennifer, Michelle, and Diane, never confessed, never gave the families closure. He sits on death row today. As of 2024, he's still alive, still silent. But the case didn't end with the verdict, because the question remained. Where were the 3 women? Investigators had theories. They'd spent 2 years searching, analyzing Walsh's movements, his properties, his routines. The most obvious possibility was rural Kansas. The 1980s farm crisis had left hundreds of abandoned properties across the state. Empty farmhouses, barns, wells, septic systems. Walsh traveled for business. He had access. Investigators used ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs at dozens of locations. Nothing. The problem was scale. Rural Kansas is vast, and 15 years had passed. Then there was the construction boom. Overland Park in the mid-1980s was concrete everywhere. New shopping centers, parking lots, office buildings. If Walsh had buried bodies before the concrete was poured, they'd be entombed forever. Beneath buildings people walk through every day. Investigators pulled building permits from 1984 to 1987, cross-referenced with Walsh's known locations. But they couldn't tear up every parking lot in the city. Kansas has over 20 large reservoirs, deep, murky. If Walsh had weighted bodies and dumped them in water, they might never surface. Dive teams searched areas where Walsh was known to travel. Nothing. Or maybe he'd used industrial equipment through his business connections, furnaces, incinerators, complete destruction. No remains, no evidence. Impossible to prove. The most likely scenario? A combination. One woman in one place, another somewhere else. Walsh was careful. He'd been operating for years. He knew how to hide evidence. Some inmates who served time with Walsh later told investigators he'd hinted at different locations. One woman in Missouri, one in Kansas, one in Oklahoma. But he never gave specifics, just enough to torment. The truth died with his silence. Emily Kemp, now going by her birth name Tiffany, tried to rebuild her life. She was 16 when she learned the truth. She stayed with Thomas and his wife. They were the only parents she'd known. But the relationship was strained. Carl Kemp, her biological father, tried to reconnect. He'd remarried, had other children. He wanted Tiffany in his life, but she was a stranger to him, and he to her. She testified at Walsh's trial. She said she didn't remember her mother, didn't remember room 131, didn't remember the yellow onesie or the stuffed rabbit. She said she felt like she'd lost something she never had. Karen, who'd cared for her that day in January 1985, reached out. She said she'd thought about Tiffany every day for 15 years, wondered if she was alive, if she was safe. They met once. Karen cried. Tiffany didn't know what to say. The baby Karen had held didn't exist anymore, and the woman Tiffany had become was shaped by a lie. Rita Vasquez attended the trial every day. She was 55 years old, retired for years, but she needed to see it through. After the verdict, she was interviewed by local news. She said 3 families still didn't have closure. Jennifer Hartley's parents were elderly, still waiting. Diane Porter's brother had never stopped looking. Michelle Kemp's family knew their daughter was dead, but they couldn't bury her. Vasquez said the system had failed in 1984. If they'd connected the cases sooner, if they'd had databases, if they'd taken the families seriously, maybe the pattern would have been stopped. Jennifer Hartley would be 59 years old today if she'd lived. Michelle Kemp would be 59. Diane Porter would be 70. Instead, their families have graves without bodies. Cases that say presumed deceased. Investigations that will never close. Raymond Walsh won't talk, won't give them peace. It's his last act of control. The 5 women from the storage facility were identified. Their families got closure, funerals, graves, an ending. But Jennifer, Michelle, and Diane remain missing, somewhere in Kansas, or Missouri, or Oklahoma, or dissolved into nothing. Tiffany Kemp is 40 years old now. She's lived longer without her mother than with her. She doesn't do interviews, doesn't talk about the case publicly. But those who know her say she thinks about it. The phone call at 2:47 p.m., the voice saying, "Here they come." The moment her mother disappeared, she was 4 months old, too young to remember, but old enough to lose everything. The Overland Park Police Department keeps the files open. Jennifer Hartley, case number 84-0156. Michelle Kemp, case number 85-0012. Diane Porter, case number 87-0094. Every few years, someone looks at them again, checks new technology, new databases, new possibilities, but the women stay missing. There are no clear answers in this case. The story doesn't end here. It simply stops being documented. Some disappearances don't leave clues. They leave gaps, silences, questions that outlive the people asking them. 3 women went looking for second chances, jobs, fresh starts, help. They found Raymond Walsh instead, and wherever they are now, they're still waiting to come home.